So this week is the Stone Badge, and we are thinking about David from the Bible story David and Goliath. David was a boy, and he fought a huge warrior called Goliath. Goliath had strong bronze armour that covered his entire body and a massive bronze spear with a super sharp blade. And David managed to defeat him, even though he was just a boy with a slingshot, a stone, a bit of wit, and a lot of faith.
So as part of the stone challenge, we thought we'd try out the rock experiment. So what do we need, guys?
We need a rock, lemons, and paper, and something sharp or a paper clip.
And what we're going to do with the paper clip?
We're going to scratch it on the board the lemon. No, scratch it first.
Scratching it first, yeah. We're going to scratch the surface of the rock with our paper clip so that you can scratch away a little bit. Excellent. Be careful with the sharp. And when you can see that it's a slightly different colour where you scratched, yeah?
That's where we're going to pour it on.
Yeah, we're going to squeeze some juice on it.
Squeeze it now?
Yeah, give it a go, see what happens. And watch really carefully to see if it fizzes. Is it fizzing at all?
Yeah, we can hear it. Yeah, it's fizzing, definitely.
Fizzing, and what does that mean? Do you remember?
That means it's got calcium.
It means it's got calcium carbonate in it. Well done, gang.
Oh, so cool.
Cool, and you can do this with loads of different kind of rocks to see what they have inside them. Let's give them a wash then. So one of this week's challenges is to make a pom-pom shooter, but we didn't have any pom-poms, so we are using marshmallows. We also didn't have any paper cups, so we have recycled, or upcycled if you will, a Pringles tube, and we've cut it into 3, and we are using that instead. So we've cut the end of it so that they're all cylinders and you can see all the way through them. And we made some cool decorations to go around the side of ours. Maybe I'll show us a decoration. So she's decorated her piece of paper, there's Alice's, there's George's, and they are going to wrap it around their Pringles tube. So we've stuck our bits of paper around our tubes, and the next thing we're going to do, we have a balloon, and we are going to snip the very end off, the end that gets blown up, not the end you blow into. We want to keep the end you blow into. Steady. Once you have cut the end off a balloon, you tie a knot in the other end, and you stretch it over one end of your tube. And then you get some blue tape, a longer piece of blue tape, or sticky tape, whatever tape you've got, and you tape the edges of the stretched out balloon onto your tube so that it stays there.
Can we stick it around it?
Yeah, stick it around it. Once your balloon is firmly secured on the end of your shooter, you're ready to go. You can use your pom-pom balls, or the kids have got marshmallows, and you're ready to fire them.
God's story, David and Goliath. So part of God's story is about the time David fought Goliath, and it begins like this. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His job was being a shepherd, which meant he spent all day in a field watching sheep eat and roll around the grass. Meanwhile, some of his brothers were off with the Israeli army preparing for war against the Philistines. The Philistines were one of the toughest armies the people of Israel had to fight. So one day, David was taking food to his brothers because his dad asked him to. But when he got there, his brothers accused him of coming so he could watch the fight instead of the sheep. Since David knew in his heart he was just obeying his dad, he didn't mind being misunderstood. Anyway, while David was there, he saw a huge Philistine man, more than 9 feet tall, step onto the field between the 2 armies. He was wearing a thick helmet and armor and carrying huge weapons. His name was Goliath, and he was definitely used to being the winner. David found out that Goliath had been stepping onto the field like this every morning for the past 40 days and saying, Give me a man and let us fight each other. But nobody from Israel was brave enough to fight him, even the king. Well, David didn't like that this giant was intimidating the Israelites. After all, they were God's special family. And because God was with the Israelites, they could have courage in any situation. So David, who wasn't even a soldier, told the king, "I'll fight against him." Nah, the king thought David was too small, but he really wanted someone to fight Goliath. So he gave in. And David knew he wasn't strong enough to beat Goliath by himself, but he believed God would be with him. So he said, "The Lord will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." The king hoped David was right. He even had his own weapons and armor put on David, but they didn't fit him. David decided to go into battle in his regular clothes. That's how sure he was that God would help him. Anyway, David went to a nearby stream and chose 5 smooth stones to use with his slingshot. Then he walked onto the battlefield to meet the massive Goliath. When Goliath saw how wimpy David looked, he was furious. He thought he'd get to fight the Israelites' strongest warrior. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals." David might have looked like a wimp, but he was actually really brave. In fact, he was so brave that when he was taking care of sheep, he fought off bears and lions. Because God helped him protect his sheep, David knew God would help him protect this special family. David said, "You come at me with a sword, but I come at you with the name of the Lord Almighty." He was explaining to Goliath that God was more powerful than anything. He also added that he would feed Goliath's flesh to the birds, which made the giant even more mad. Then David took a stone, put it in the slingshot, and slung it at Goliath. Goliath didn't even get a chance to swing a sword because the stone hit him right in the forehead and sunk in deep. He face-planted straight into the ground. Nobody could believe it. Then David ran over, took hold of the giant's sword, and drew it from the sheath. He took the sword and cut off Goliath's head. David carried the head all the way back to Jerusalem. And when the Philistine army realized Goliath was dead, they started running away like a bunch of scaredy cats. The Israelites chased the Philistines, shouting loudly. They had won. God used David, who was just an average kid, to rescue his people. And that's the story of David and Goliath. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. David was a shepherd. He brought his brothers lunch. He saw Goliath. Goliath scared everybody. David wasn't scared. He knew God was stronger. David fought Goliath. He used one stone. God helped him kill Goliath. The Israelites won. God's people were saved. And that's a part of God's story.